Hey, David Brewster here again with another Three for All, and this is Three Scary Ideas from George Lynch. And I've always found George Lynch to be a very interesting guitar player. This lesson's just going to take a look at some of his kind of unusual moves on the neck. And, he does kind of have an interesting approach and a very unusual approach to things. And I've always, kind of learned something different or uncovered something different when I've worked on some of his ideas and music. So hopefully, you'll kind of unlock, some different moves and fingerings with this lesson too. First idea here is a scary shifting lick. And I learned this lick out of an old, like Guitar Book magazine lesson with George Lynch. And it's funny because I have known this lick and used this lick for so many years that it was a few years ago, a number of years ago, I tried to figure out, where the lick came from. I was like, where is this lick that I find myself playing? Where did that come from? And I tried to trace it back. And when I discovered it, I traced it all the way back to George Lynch, and it was like, oh my gosh, that's an old George Lynch lick. But yeah, I learned this a long time ago from a guitar magazine, and then it just basically, appeared under my fingers, for years and years. And then the next thing I knew, it just kind of became one of those licks. But it's really cool. You could use this over E minor or G, depending on, what key you want to put it in. So if we think of it like in the key of E, it looks something like this. You're on the D string and you're going to cascade and kind of shift and slide your way down the G, but you're also going to grab, notes within the key on the D string. So you're doing something like this. And it sounds really cool if you kind of like pinch the notes on the G. And you don't necessarily want to like pinch harmonic every single note, but just try to squeal it every once in a while and it sounds really cool. Now the cool thing about that lick is you can also transport the notes you had on the D string to the A string. So now instead of doing different thirds, now you can do different sixths, which is really cool. So instead of this, you can do this. And there you've got just a slight, variation. Which is really cool. Instead of that. Now one more thing that I've done with that over the years, and it's kind of funny because I turned that into like almost a twangy country lick. And if you think more G instead of E minor, but if you think more G major, do kind of a hybrid picking thing and utilize the open G string, you can twang that out like crazy. Next up, we're going to do some scary slides. And George definitely is well known for doing these really quick kind of shift slide maneuvers where he'll do something like this. And there he's basically sliding, like say we're still in the key of E or E minor. But if you think that, just think, B and D, a hammer on a pull off. And then we're going to shift slide down to the flat 5, which is that B flat. It's really cool. And sometimes he'll double up the hammer on pull off and then slide. You can also tap this too. But another thing that's interesting is if you look at his playing style and the way he kind of approaches scales and melodies and things like that, like instead of just playing like a straight, minor pentatonic scale, George would like dress that up with little slides and shifts, and he would imply like flat 5s and major thirds and things like that, like this. instead of just that straight kind of plain scale. It's just kind of an example of where he might throw in a slide, right? The last example here are scary stretches, and in an old guitar world lesson with George Lynch, which it seemed like every other month he was either in Guitar World or he had a lesson in Guitar World, or there was a Lynch Mob transcription or something. Like, he was very, very frequent in Guitar World back in the day, especially like the late 80s, early 90s, that period. It was like George Lynch was in Guitar World all the time, which was great because he was always showing cool licks and talking about, things that he was learning, and he was taking lessons with, like various guitar instructors on the West Coast, which is cool. I mean, he was constantly pushing himself, trying to get better and trying to, learn more about music. But in this lesson that I'm referring to, he was doing these stretches and warm-up exercises, and there was a series of exercises that were really interesting, and I'd never really seen this before until, that George Lynch lesson. But he was warming up and playing things without his index finger, which is very bizarre. But he was mainly just focusing on using, the middle third and pinky on the fret hand. And he was talking about how, sometimes when he's warming up and he's, kind of, working on his technique, he'll avoid using his index finger for a little while and play some licks and warm-ups and exercises without the index. And then once the remaining three fingers kind of get their exercise and get warmed up, then when he brings the index finger back into play, it almost feels like you have an extra finger. And I can definitely verify that's true, because I've worked on this idea. I've also kind of shared it with students over the years. And it's weird if you do this, if you remove your index finger and just kind of rely on, playing with your middle, third, and pinky. It almost gives you that sensation like if you've got rollerblades or roller skates on and you skate for a while and then you put your regular shoes back on and your feet feel kind of weird. That's almost what your hand feels like by doing this, because when you bring that index finger back, your fingers are kind of like, whoa, there's an extra finger, even though it's been there, the whole time. You just decided not to use it. So let's try a little bit of this. In the lesson, he was a little bit lower on the fretboard. But let's make this easy, just so we don't, hurt anything, and we don't pull, or stretch too far too soon. So let's just move it back where we were there, like around the 12th position. And to start with, let's just do a really simple back and forth, motion, 12 and 14 on the D and the G string. But I'm only going to use my index and middle finger like this. Just a traditional kind of hammer-on pull-off lick. But only use those two fingers. Now when you're ready, do the same thing, but now move to using your middle finger and your third finger, like this. And don't worry about playing it fast. Don't worry about speed, just worry about hitting those notes. I didn't mean to kind of go into a little flurry there. Go slow, go like this. Or however, fast or slow you're comfortable playing it. And then try it again with your third and pinky. Now for a lot of you out there, especially if you don't have a strong pinky, this is going to be really hard, but it's a great exercise. Right? So it's going to toughen and strengthen your hand big time. Your fret hand fingers are going to feel like, the Incredible Hulk when you're done. Now, just to kind of throw you another challenge, like just stay in the same position and play something like a E blues scale, right? Adding the flat 5, the minor pentatonic. But play it and don't use your index finger at all. Just rely on your other 3 fingers. Do something like this. Now that's a really simple and basic and common scale, but playing it that way is not very common, right? That's very interesting and weird because you're used to doing this. But now, we're not using the index finger, which for a lot of you out there watching this, that's going to be a huge challenge because you're probably taking away your strongest finger, right? So this will definitely strengthen and toughen up your fret hand big time. Now, in the lesson, George was talking about starting, higher on the fretboard, and then just gradually kind of inch your way back down the neck to where, you've got larger stretches, and it's going to be more of a challenge for your fret hand. So don't go too far too fast. Like, take this kind of thing slowly, right? And slowly build more stretching and more strength and more speed. Um, but in that lesson, he was doing this kind of weird, it was down here for one thing, which is really bizarre without the index finger. But let's not hurt ourselves. Let's take it way up here. And that's basically the exercise that he showed down here. But I don't want you to practice it there first. I want you to practice it here and then just slowly bring it down. Right? Over time, don't just sit there and do what I was doing there. Like, practice and stop at each position and get a feel for it and then move on to the next one, And once again, don't worry about speed. Don't worry about, hitting some Malmsteen metronome setting or something. Like, don't worry about that. We're working on building strength. Think about doing, some push-ups or sit-ups or something. Don't worry about how fast you're going. Just make sure you're doing even and clean, movements and, playing it correctly. That basically wraps up this look at 3 scary ideas from George Lynch, which, regardless of how you feel about the music from Dokken, there's really no denying the fact that George Lynch is a very interesting guitar player. He always has just thrown out, really different ideas, different sounds. His approach to everything, rhythm and lead and melody and everything is different, and I always look for that in music and musicians that I listen to and learn from or, borrow ideas from. If they really present something different, I always stop and take notice. And it doesn't matter who they are, or what style of music they play. It could be bluegrass, it could be metal, it could be jazz, it could be anything, folk or country or something. It doesn't really matter. Because when my ear hears something, my ear runs to it. And then I usually kind of follow after it with my guitar in my hand, So I trust my ear, when I hear something I like. And then I usually take the time to sit there and at least try to uncover it or understand whatever it was that my ear, locked onto. So good luck with this. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons and leave me some comments and feedback. And I'll be back with some more 3 for All before you know it. Thank you.